Yeah, so welcome. This is episode 2 of Banging Rocks TV. I'm super excited, Monera, that you've been able to join us for this. Um, Before starting the recording, we were just talking about that difference between sort of where an HR title gets you and what's actually going on under the surface with that. And so, I know outreach and community outreach and social impact at Meow Wolf in Las Vegas. That would be sort of the title. But if I could just read it out, because I love the really evocative description that you've given for yourself of a creative mischief maker who's most happy in artistic fellowship. And your work includes starting questionable cults with notorious software gurus, writing immersive narrative for umbraphiles. I love that word so much. Adventuring with artistic hoteliers, and of course, catalyzing shenanigans, which you deploy on unsuspecting bystanders in the city of Neon. So, wow, and welcome.
Right, all of those things, which again all are related to fellowship, right? And
Yeah,
fellowship. But yes, I have done all those things, but that's a description that definitely confuses HR. They're like, what's an umbrapile? So
yeah.
funny.
So how would you dive in a little bit more in terms of like what is it that you do and that you're engaged with?
Yeah, so what I do right now is I am community and social impact for Meow Wolf on the Las Vegas project. What that has mostly meant, right, at the moment, because we're not open, right, is that I'm kind of caretaking and taking care of the artist community and the Las Vegas community, and then also feeling out with the Las Vegas community overall, and that includes like educators, academics, the government, all of these different stakeholders that make up a community, what they really kind of want to see from us. And so we're on kind of a information gathering moment where we have these community conversations and we just talk to folks. So that's a lot of what we're doing. What I hope to do, which I have zero commitments around, but it is the reason I got this job, because I was previously on the Governor's Commission for Volunteer Service. And what I'm really interested in and have a lot of questions around is, could someone like Meow Wolf, which has kind of a unique IP, but one that's starting to get known, can we drop story all over the city and then engage folks, like gamify social impact? So I'm really, really interested in this question of, like, if there's millennials and young people, and I know this from the kind of the festival world as well, there are a lot of young people who come to these transformational events and do these amazing things, and then they go home and they don't know what to do with their community. And so as someone who's been like a Burning Man organizer locally as well, I saw that a lot. They come home and what do? They gather at a bar, they drink, and they tell Burning Man stories. And then they don't know how else to engage. In some communities like San Francisco, where there's like a bigger art thing, what they do is build art, right? And so how do we get folks who maybe can't build art in the same way, but still engage in the community? So one of the things that I really tried to push for was to gamify. Now I'm talking to government officials and like the governors. They were like, what do you want to do? Yeah. But what I want to do is drop things like, what happens if I take a part of our story and then tweak it for someone like a food bank, and then drop that story there. But the only way you can get it is if you go and do a volunteer project at that food bank, right? And so because what we did see in the data was that millennials don't really volunteer, which means they're also not donating. So like, that's the biggest way to get donors in, is to volunteer and have that connection. And I think that there's a little bit of like, millennials were helicopter parented. So unless someone really invites you to the table and tells you exactly what to do, they have a hard time saying, oh, that's a thing I should do. So I think that that's part of it. So how do we open that table invitation and turn our city into this place where we can play? And so I've been trying to develop the relationships, and I've also talked to our platform teams and trying to get to that point where we can go, oh, well, let's see what happens if we drop a totem in a library, or drop it with a fellow partner. One of the things I admire the most about Vince, who's our CEO, is he's always been really open with like, Factory Obscura is in Oklahoma. They're in our same exact space. They're not technically that far away from us, but we've always been really good partners with them, right? Like, and we want to raise everyone's, all tides raise the boats, right? So we kind of want to raise that profile. But yeah, that's what I'm really interested in. It's mostly like me trying to convince every member of a team to like try to get everyone on that same page. So that's where I'm at. And we don't know if that will happen. So I'm not saying that this is a project that will happen. This is what I've been obsessed with since before I even started at Meow Wolf. So
amazing. I love that. And I mean, it's interesting because, there's a lot of the theoretical talk. Like I love, in folks like Jane McGonigal when she's talking about like, how do we turn that gamification to get people engaged with the amazing quests that are real life.
right.
And to see and hear about you doing that on the ground and figuring out, okay, it's like, how do we do that? And not just in a way where a couple of users come to us, but where we interweave that into the fabric of the city itself. That's huge.
Right. Yeah. And I think we have like a lot of the narrative support. Like Meow Wolf has just gone through this kind of union moment that was very public. And it's slightly funny because it's related to a portion of our narrative. And so on some level, we manifested our own narrative in this way, and it played out in these kind of interesting ways. And so I feel like we're at this place where the narrative team could be like, oh, yes, I understand. Like by creating stories that have this impact, we can actually move the needle in real life, right? And so that, I think that is something to really play with and look at, which I know sounds super mystical on some level, right? But I mean, that's the reality of the world, is if you put energy towards something, it probably will start unfolding towards that thing that you want to have happen in the world, right? So
yeah, no, absolutely. So, and it sounds like you're in a really interesting spot within that work of being this bridge with the city, with the artist community, with all of these different pieces. How do you find that? And what are the sort of superpowers that you bring? Because I mean, you've got some stuff going on to be able to make that work. What are the things that you feel you kind of bring into that?
well, one of the things that I am is like insanely curious and also willing to do things that are like way outside of my comfort zone. So like recently I've been reading lots of economic data around what it means to be a city and like impact. There's this whole thing on impact investment and alpha in impact investment. So I'm just like, I'm pushing myself. I'm not a math person and not that person, but I'm pushing myself out into that because that's how you measure success, right? So like, if you don't understand a little bit of economic modeling, then you can't say, well, this is the question I have, and then this is how we proved that it did something, right? So I'm always trying to push myself way outside of the comfort zone, and I always ask for help. So, which means my network is really large because I'm willing to be like, hey, I don't know anything about this, but you seem like you do know something about this. Can I ask you a bunch of questions? And people are really kind and generous if you just listen and take an interest, right? So I do a lot of that. And then I answer a lot of questions for folks like, we don't know what to do about this. How can you, and so I'm willing to be that person as well. So it helps build that network. I have always found that the more generous you are with your time and energy, the more it comes back to you, even if you're not like trying to make it come back to you. It does, right? So that's kind of also how I got this position, is because there's a bunch of little baby artists and they're just starting in their career and they're not like ready for commercial art yet, but they could be in 5 years, and they could be if we nurtured them. And so I definitely love cultivating those relationships and really just watching them grow and flourish and giving them that energy and sunlight that they need. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat being in a zone where, like, when you talk about the different groups you collaborate with who are in that same domain, and you'll have those clutches of folks where it is more that competitive world, and then the people are just like, the stuff we're doing is so cool, let's play together and let's all make this work.
Right.
And yeah, the magic that comes with that is pretty amazing.
It is. It's really fun. And I do think that play is like super sacred. And so that's the other big thing that I eventually want to do is how do we teach people to play in our space, right? And I find that in festivals, oftentimes, like I've been a festival performer, and you would think like you're at Coachella, you're doing the thing, you're like super excited about all, and then you like toss them the ball as a performer, and they're just like, nope, not doing that, right? Like, and they have zero interest in playing, and it's because we hit like a bit of shame, and we hit a I don't know what to do, and no one's told me how to play this way. So I've taken this step back where like that path of the acolyte might actually have to be a real thing, and we have to like slowly pass them the ball. So that's one of the other questions I have is, can we train up people to play better if we give them containers to play in, like a Meow Wolf, right? Because Meow Wolf lets you play in that way. And before I was an employee, I took my friend who was he was an agent for United Talent Agency, and he was building out the book for immersive in United Talent Agency, because immersive producers kind of need representation because we're not always the best at asking for money in the same ways. So we took him to Santa Fe to have this like whole crazy road trip. And what we were doing was really playing inside of the Meow Wolf. And then when he saw that, he was just like, oh, this space is really, really impressive. And it's more fun than movies. And you can also take something like a movie IP and build a pop-up and then let people play in that, right? People want it, right? They want to play in these ways. You see that in Comic-Con, right? People are investing thousands of dollars on costumes so they can play in a world that on some level, Comic-Con doesn't actually kind of deliver a physical world that they play in. It's just like this giant convention center, right? So I think we're gonna start seeing a lot more of that. We're gonna have a lot more intentional environments in which people can play, which I am very excited about. And with a physical location, I know this from Evermore. So Evermore is not that far from me, which is a spot in almost Salt Lake City. And my daughter and I have gone to Evermore like 4 times. And because it's the same actors and it's the same space, we have longitudinal narrative, and they like meet her each time, and she, you know, she's passed out bracelets and stuff to them. And so she's included in the world in a way that is really interesting. So that long-term space, if we have performers engaging with folks in that way, the historian will add you to the narrative in Evermore, right? And so, and some folks are paying to be at Evermore in these like really interesting ways. So I don't know, I see like, and that allows for play to like evolve and grow, and you can get into like deeper topics and really push a narrative into these interesting spaces psychologically that you might not have ever encountered on these like surface level conversations. And I'm really excited to see how that can impact somewhere like Las Vegas, which has been casinos and balls to the wall, right? Like go all out and just party on this very surface level, right? And I'm really curious to see how that might change.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's super inspiring. When you look, I mean, you mentioned the sort of the food banks as one example, but where are some of the other places that for you feel like there's the real opportunity to be bringing that story, narrative, gamification side to get people engaged more?
Well, so my coworker Fawn, she is a native Paiute, and one of her concepts, which I really, really love, is what if we projection mapped the actual desert in areas that needed help? You know, like we have the Great Basin area, and Nellis Air Force Base wants to bomb it and turn it into, well, I mean, they use it for like flyover missions. And so, but it's a beautiful part of our desert. And so if you can bring folks there and give them an experience there that's really special and unique, perhaps they would be more on board to be like, no, we shouldn't bomb this because I had this moment here, right? So I think that there's like a lot of opportunities in conservation, and a lot of opportunities in education as well. And then one of the big things that faces us here is also poverty and homelessness, right? And especially, very especially teen homelessness. A lot of parents you don't have in other parts of the world a spot where parents can lose their entire rents situation and then just skip town, right? And sometimes they skip town and they don't tell their kids and they leave their kids here. So we do have like a really hard homeless teen situation in Las Vegas. So I really think that there's ways to kind of include and train and uplift some of these stories in ways that don't seem so depressing and so sad that, you know, where people don't feel like they can help, right? And I think that is one of the reasons people don't help. They don't know, oh, that seems like a very big, overwhelming problem. I can't help with that. Like, whereas you could say, actually, you can help, and here's like a really easy way. So again, inviting more people to more tables is like all I ever want to do.
That's wonderful. To end off this section, you've mentioned like that feeling of play and a sort of that non-zero sum, let's collaborate. What are some of the other things that you find for the people that you love to work with and who are really thriving in the world that you're working in? What does that look like for you?
Oh, so most of the people I love to work with are like also polymaths, right? Like they are interested in a bunch of different things, oftentimes things that I don't know, like some of the crazy collaborators that put on one of my favorite events, which is room service. They apparently, I didn't know this until the movie Social Dilemma came out. Apparently they were all part of like the entire thing of Social Dilemma and produced that video. Right? And I was like, oh, that explains why I've had so many crypto conversations and so many tech conversations at parties that seemed really complicated. But that's why. So I think that some folks have had so much play that they have to like morph into these like more complicated levels of play, which is what room service really does. And those folks are some of those folks, right? Like those who are trying to change the world, are making really impactful tech, are really disrupting industries, right? So I'm a big fan of disruptors and pirates and chaos magic, like the whole thing. Like that's how we move forward. And you know, and Vegas is a place that never had sacred cows, so I kind of grew up here. So the idea of like, oh, we don't like this hotel anymore, we're tearing it down, we're starting a new one. I know people dislike that from a historical point of view, but I kind of like it because we can kind of start over and say, well, that didn't work for us. We don't have to be beholden to it. What does work for us now, right? And that question is sometimes scary for folks, but I love that question.
Fantastic, thanks. So let's take a sec and we'll move into that second segment where we'll talk a little bit more about like, how did you get here? You're doing so many cool things. What was the road like to be involved in all the stuff you're up to now?
Oh yeah, awesome. I've been thinking about this a lot. So I've always played random games. I didn't really like, I was the person who would start Assassin. I went to 4 high schools. I started Assassin at 4 high schools. And for those of you who might be young, Assassin was this like really fun game where you could get killed, but it was like via paper, right? And also very random, like sneaking a post-it note that said the word bomb into someone's lunchbox, right? Like, so it was a very funny way to play. And then I also homeschooled my kids, right? And because I was really inspired by Montessori and Reggio Emilia and Waldorf and some of the more alternative ways to homeschool, a lot of my homeschooling really looked like me needle felting fairy worlds that they would discover on a staircase. And then me going, oh, I'm not sure how that got there, right? And then playing for 4.5 hours trying to track down fairies, right? So I didn't really realize that the thing I was doing all my life was a thing, which is experience design, right? And then it really kind of hit home when DEF CON asked my partner at the time and I to like bring people to the main party of DEF CON. And I guess people tended to go to the other parties. And so the first year I invented a very easy virus game, and we were just like seeding wooden, like laser etched wooden tokens. And then if you had a combination of different tokens when you came to the party, we would tell you if you died, mutated, or lived. And if you mutated, we handed you a bag of coins and you had to like infect other people, right? And so that was like the first one. And then that was so successful that they gave us a way bigger budget the next year. And that year, I had convinced. So we built this cult. It was the 23rd year of DEF CON, and so we decided, and the theme was film noir. And so we decided that we were going to build kind of a cult. And the cult was based on this idea that because Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were Eskimo brothers and shared the same girlfriend at one point, that Jack Parsons had to fake his own death and now lives in a space station and is sending communication down. So via the Red Woman, right, which is a film noir trope. And so we decided who would be the craziest person to anoint as the new Pope and representative of this pretend and fictitious cult. And we decided John McAfee was the only reasonable choice. And he said yes. We like contacted him via tweet. And we definitely had this crazy ceremony where I put a bunch of folks in like white robes. There were 23 of us. And we like walked through and we like to Karina Barada, right? Like, so, and we had like this crazy moment. And what was really my goal of that was we were giving all of these DEF CONers these kind of like a hail bop date. So because people go to DEF CON together and then they don't always interact with other folks. And so I wanted to like mix folks up. So we gave them this date and they had to like find their escape pod. And if they found their escape pod, then I made them do like embarrassing things, like we duck goose, or like we did all of these like ridiculous things. And what happened at first was like people held up their card and couldn't talk to each other, and then they would match, and then I would make them do this kind of crazy thing, which broke them, and then they were so excited to find the rest of their pod, right? And so it really did mix up the entire world of DEF CON in this way. And so, but DEF CON's kind of a boys club, so my partner was the person who arranged that, and they've never done the same kind of thing because we broke, right? So, but then I found out, oh, this thing I do is actually a thing. And so, and then from there I ended up on a project at Life is Beautiful, and I called an audible because Tony Hsieh had traded the Big Rig Jig to go to Dismaland. He bought it to be at Life is Beautiful, but he got this email from Banksy and was like, yo, I need this thing for my Dismaland thing. And so Tony had traded the Big Rig Jig for a Banksy project, which was the box truck with like kind of that Asian waterfall thing that was part of his New York show. And I called an audible and I was like, well, what would Banksy do? And so we faked a bunch of Banksies that said Dismaland Fest. I don't know how to cut a stencil, but I convinced an artist to cut a stencil that I literally just printed Dismaland on a file folder. And that's how I ended up meeting Meow and becoming friends with the founders, was because I called this audible and they were like, wow, she's got stones. All right, cool, right? And since then, my life has been this surreal weirdness of like going all over the place. I went to Eclipse because someone from the Meow Wolf team wanted to meet me there. So he put me on a project his friend was running. And like, so I've been open to saying yes to a lot of things that most people would be like, I'm not sure how I'm gonna monetize on that. I just say yes, you know, and I'm just like, well, it's gonna figure itself out, so.
And really interesting that you mentioned it, like that in with Meow Wolf being that piece of doing like a subversive pseudo Banksy art project piece, and then it not being the like, oh yeah, I see your business plan for that. It's like, okay, yeah, you're committed to what it is that you're doing.
Right, yeah, it was super. There was like a homeless guy outside with a goat and a long tie-dye trench coat. Like, you couldn't write this stuff out. And I was like, cool, Banksy did this thing where he handed him canvases. So we bought a bunch of canvases and gave it to the homeless guy with the goat to sell outside of the festival. So, and we convinced art critics that Banksy was there, and my fake Banksys went on eBay for like $500. You know, like we threw 1,000 of them. We folded them to paper airplanes and threw a bunch of them into the Duran Duran concert, right? Like, it was ridiculous. And just audibles, right? Like, okay, cool. this is the thing we're doing now, you guys. So
You touched a little on that piece of how, you know, there's elements of this world that are a bit of a boys' club. How do you find that, and how have you found navigating that world?
you know what I have found really interesting about at least the festival space in general is, and kind of like the large art production space, which you kind of see out of Burning Man as well, is holy moly, it's the first time where the women crush it. Like almost, I mean, I happen to know Nova Han, who produces Electric Forest, like Marcy, who was Symbiosis' person, who's now on Meow Wolf. Like the women are so powerful, and I think it's because you have, well, first off, they're collective art projects, so you need that caretaking nurturingness to happen. Otherwise, these festivals don't get produced, and it can't just be a boys' club, because no one would get fed, right? Like from that
very Firefest, right?
Right? Yeah, you would get Firefest, 100%. Yeah, so I've been really excited about this space, and Meow Wolf this is true of Meow Wolf too. My boss is a woman. We have a woman CEO as part of our office of CEO. We have a lot of really powerful women in our organization. And so I feel like this is like one of the disruptive things that people aren't talking about, but the festival world and Meow Wolf is very woman centric because of its collaborative nature. And so I think as we see more collaborative projects, and I think that this is going to be true of tech and banking and other things, right? Like the more we need collaborative environments to go forward, and as things get more complicated and complex, I think we're going to need more collaboration, right? The more women I think will shine in this way. I'm actually not even sure about like a single leader anymore. I'm really excited about our office of CEO, because it's 3 leaders that are working together, because it is complicated and it is complex, and the thing we're trying to do is hard, right? And so having a team that's working together, almost like that old Spartan model of having that council, right? Like I think it's gonna be powerful, and I think women are gonna shine in these moments.
Yeah, no, that makes all kinds of sense. So for people who are inspired by this space, but maybe feel like it's too removed from what they can get into, or are curious about how they would do it, I think, like, especially say a young woman who is interested in getting into this space, what advice would you give them?
I mean, my advice is always the same: come and play with us, right? How about you come and try it, and if you're super my favorite is not playing with the person who is like ready to play, right? Like, cool, they're already ready to play. I could just send them off on a mission and then they can go and do it, right? Like, I love that shy person who's been unlocked by the opportunity to play in a way, like, I didn't know life can be like this, right? And so like that moment for me is always great, when you can be like, oh, I didn't know I could do a solo show, or I could paint one canvas, right? Like, I love those moments. So I would just say, come and play, put yourself out there, and ask for help. Cool, I want to do that thing, I don't know how to get there. People are so nice, like really nice. I've asked for help from, I recently took a Coursera course on banking, and I messaged the guy who was teaching it, and he taught the class 12 years ago, right? And he responded back. It was like, no problem, right? So asking for help, if there's something you really want to do, find the person who you admire and see if you could write them, and then if not, go down to the next person, right? And see what happens.
Well, hi, I've been on the phone, so I'm
Yeah, no, that's amazing advice, and certainly I have found that too. And you said it before, and I really want to underscore that piece of the mixture of having the transparency and humility of saying, like, here's something I don't know, I would love to find out more about this, or can I play too, essentially, mixed with actually then like listening and engaging and playing. It's kind of magical, the transformation that comes with that.
Yeah, and then that's my other big mission: make more people who can play, right? Like, because I am, what I'm doing is super easy to do, and I am not the be all end all. What I want is for everyone else to be able to convert other folks too, right? So I want them like, oh, I had this really fun experience. And that's what we saw at DEF CON, right? Like once they got it, then the other ones were able, like once I modeled it, they were able to lean in harder, right? And play harder. And it was really fun. And they were like software guys, right? So, not always the most playful, even though they're DEF CONers, which are, they're like tricksters.
Right. The playful side of, yeah.
Right.
I'm curious, I've got a little 9-year-old and an 8-year-old as well, and we go deep into play. How have you found being a parent has evolved or shifted how you engage with play?
It's really funny because my kids think, you know, like I have 2 teenagers, and this might be way personal, but I'm gonna go there. So like I had a teenager and she was deflowered, and I suggested that we go to Ben and Jerry's and have Cherry Garcia ice cream, and she was like, Mom, not everything's an immersive bits, right? Like, I was like, but it would be really appropriate. And she's just like, we're not doing that. I was like, okay, so we can get ice cream sundaes though. And she's like, fine, right? So there's part of them that know that like I'm always goofing off and always playing. And then, but during this pandemic has been really fun because I know a lot of parents felt like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? These kids are at home all the time. And I was like, one of my child is an elf and is like leaning into her elfing story, and has become a dragon trainer, which she did at Evermore. So, and then the other 2, one of them started a business, and right, like, and one of them is like making movies. So I'm just like, I let them play also and find themselves. So, and I find that level of parenting is unusual for folks, but that, you know, I want them to find themselves. They don't need to find my expectation of them. That's unnecessary, right? So it's been really fun. I do think that there's a huge opportunity for creating some guide for parents. So I've been thinking about like the field guide of magical parenting of like, this is how you play, this is how you hide, this is how you build a quest, right? Like, so that they can play with their kids a little better, because obviously in the pandemic, all that complaining, especially on media too, right, indicated to me, wow, you guys really don't know how to play with your kids, and you expected school to cover all of that, right? And so I think that there's a big opportunity for parents to dive deeper with their kids.
I love that. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll take a second, and maybe we'll shift over into that sort of third section. Clearly, the work that you do and the way that you do it, your passions are right interwoven, and like it's at the heart of what you do. We're living in kind of, I mean, even before all of the COVID stuff, we're living in such crazy, intense times. Like, what does that look like from where you sit?
Well, yeah, so I mean, I've heard the term, both the Great Reset and the Great Awakening happen, right? Which is funny, as a lit major, I'm like, well, we did have the Enlightenment era, right? So which is kind of fun. But what I really see, and this is where I think this path of the acolyte can really people are, I think, bored. And I think we see a lot of contention because people are bored. And I mean, I live in an entertainment city that theoretically is supposed to be fun, right? Like nightclubs, dancing, the whole thing, right? Gambling. And I walk around the strip all the time, and even there people seem bored. Like aimlessly wandering with yard drinks is what it feels like. And so I think we have this like opportunity to engage, but I think that we don't know how to, right? So I just see like lots of opportunity, and especially for our artist folks and folks who are really good at building communities, this might be the first time where we're like, that's a valuable skill that we should really like pay people for, is connecting other folks into friendships and finding themselves and being better people. So I think that the hunger is there, and we've had a lot of like self-help, which I feel like is like individualism kind of growth, and that industry. But I think the next step is like, what does tribal care look like? What does, what does self-care look like when you're talking about the interplay of friendship dynamics and community dynamics, right? So, and what does taking care, we have some really great leaders, but they've always kind of come from like, either religious leaders, like we've had a lot of African-American pastors and stuff who have really taken care of their communities, and then social justice leaders who have taken care of their communities. But I think that needs to just be like, it shouldn't be rallied around an issue. Like, we need communities all the time, right? And so that's what I'd like to see a lot more of, is how do we empower more community building, and what does it mean to take care of communities, and what does that look like, and how can we model that behavior for other folks, right? So I'm hoping, we talk about this a lot with Tara, who's my counterpart at Area 15. She is tenant relations, but really what she calls herself is building internal community within Area 15, because that is what needs to happen. They're not tenants, they're part of the Area 15 family, and we are working together to like disrupt this industry and disrupt what it means to connect at a mall or a place, right? So I really see a lot of opportunity. I know it's really grim out there, but I think that this is like the storm's gonna break moment, right? So I feel lots of hope.
Yeah, and it's interesting in what you're describing of how, you know, there is a lot of that rush in of people typically kind of into Vegas looking for some of that surface entertainment, and then kind of from a tectonic point of view, that there's this opportunity for that depth that you're working on trying to build into it, so that people are connecting that depth with entertainment and realizing how that can really engage full self.
Right, and what does entertainment look like if it's also lived experience, right? Like, and that's like, I think that's one of the things that the immersive space gets really well, does really well, is it connects people in lived experience. Like, you, some of those haunts, and some of them are really scary, right? You've survived the haunt with these folks, and you're probably better friends because of it, right? And these people you probably didn't know, you got to talk to. So that's the other thing, is I found what I love about this space is it creates these opportunities for friendship. You know, I mean, Burning Man, they always say that it's contrived hardship to facilitate rapid bonding, right? And so I really kind of love playing with that notion, but I don't think it has to be hardship. I think it can be unity, and I think it can be utopian. And so I think we can set aside some of the more negative narratives and look at, like, how do we work together and how do we build together? So I'm very, very interested in creating experiences that continue to play with those ideas.
Wonderful. And I mean, obviously it touches on the stuff we've talked about, but what for you lately has been that you want to share kind of most on your heart and mind? What's been really alive for you in the last little while?
Oh, well, besides working on some interesting programming concepts that relate to the narrative, I'm very much like a cruise director who's like, okay, well, our story says this, so our food should match, and right, to really kind of give a multisensory view. Now, I'm not the only decision maker, and I'm probably mostly an evangelist, but that's okay. It's fine. But yeah, so I really want to connect all of like the senses and push that. And I am starting to create little modules for the field guide of magical parenting. And then I am in the midst of writing a novel, which is called Tender Gardens, which is actually uses play as a metric. It's using play as a way to connect people in this kind of interesting religious context. So yeah, so I'm really working on lots of ideas around play and modeling good behavior, and also connecting with folks, right? So that's the other thing, is I can't live this reality if I'm not all putting myself out there. And I call myself cross-tribal because I tend to bounce around in tribes, and I would be like the person who would trade, right, like between things. So, and I like that because I get to see a bunch of different folks and be integrated into their worlds in a slightly different way. So
yeah, no, amazing. What's the question that I haven't asked that you really either wish I would, or the thing that you'd like to talk about that we haven't made a space for?
I don't know. We've talked about a lot of good stuff. I feel like you've created a very good container. I guess I mean, we could open to questions. I'm always down for that because I'm not the only person. But I don't know. I say open to questions.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so welcome folks who've just been arriving this last little bit. We're chatting with Monera Mason, and feel free to jump into the conversation now.
Oh, yeah, so Diana, it's been really interesting. I was telling Daniel about getting VR, so like I now have my first VR headset. There's two things that I've found really fun. One, I thought, well, right now VR is a little lonely, but I haven't tried some of the chat things yet. So, but I've found like one of the craziest things is like I did not want to meet Darth Vader. Like I tried playing Vader Immortal, and like when the door opens and he's like yelling it, I was like, nope, I'm out. Right? Like so, and it gave me these like real feelings of being in there. So I totally see where VR can unite folks in through like actual emotional responses, right? And I was just like, oh, this is more intense than I thought it was going to be. So I'm really excited because you saw that with the internet, right? Like where LGBT kids in particular didn't maybe lived in a smaller town, didn't have access to other LGBT kids. And now there's this thriving LGBT community online. Well, what does that look like when you're like not only thriving online, but also are part of like a VR world where you're doing something together, right? Versus just being on tech, you know. And I worked for a company called there.com, which was a competitor to Second Life. And so, and that was kind of, and we were really early.
What was it called? Sorry.
It was there, THERE.com. Yeah, I think the only surviving thing from them is IMDU. But yeah, but that's kind of the thing. Like when you can play together in VR, you will have a stronger relationship than just being on a like bulletin board or chat, right?
Yeah, and so it's open conversation now. Anyone's welcome to jump in.
I have a not fun question,
Yeah.
which is, it's about the boys club nature that you've seen in certain industries. So I'm coming from an engineering background, and that's definitely something that I've run into in spaces and generally made a choice to avoid as much as possible. But I'm just curious, like where you've seen it, how that manifests for this interactive industry. And how, if you have any ideas of how we kind of move forward together with that, rather than going against that and creating a completely different world.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Like how to kind of change to be more inclusive rather than coming in and creating something completely separate.
Yeah, I have worked for software companies before, and at one company, I was the only person they allowed from marketing to come into the room because they were just like, we are so sick of marketing selling vaporware that doesn't exist, and they don't understand what we do, and you're the only person who seems to understand what we do. But I didn't actually really understand what they did any more than any of my team. What I did do was I played into what they were interested in. And the reason there was that disconnect, like that's where I got into like super nerdy culture, and like they all played Go. So I taught myself Go so that I can play Go with them, right? And so I break silos and try to break silos instead of raging against them. I tried that other approach also, and I found it didn't get me anywhere or as far as it does when you are like, where's our common ground? Where can we meet people where they're at? And I think that one thing to recognize is that both men and women have been subjected to the same toxic programming, right? So like they've also been subjected to that programming. So how do we break it together? And one way is to offer peace and unity, right? And so I do that a lot as a silo breaker. But the immersive space, I again feel like it's strongly female because of its collaborative nature, because you need actors and you need all of these different kinds of people. Your tech guys have to talk to your directors, right? Like all of these things have to kind of come together, and it just doesn't help anyone to be in those silos. And so and one other way I break a lot of silos is work on a smaller prototype project. So that you can see each other's humanity and how you work and forgive each other for, the thing you said that was inappropriate, right? Like, I think that helps break things, and coming in with like, okay, people are strange and hard and sometimes really difficult to work with. Why is that the case? And so I always lean into curiosity, like, how do I get you there, right? So yeah, I've often been the girl in the boys club because I've leaned into it, and then I can help translate the boys club and bring in more women, right? So and that's kind of what I try to do. They're like, oh, but I'm also, sensitivity is the thing that I often hear from engineers is like, well, you're not that sensitive, so it's easy for us to talk to you, right? And so, and that sometimes that fear of communication is because they're worried about offending folks. So then there's like this stilted block. And if you don't know that that's the reason why there's a block, because you didn't lean into curiosity, you can never fix it, right? So like, I'm like, oh, you think women are sensitive, but what if they're not? And what if this situation isn't what you think it is, right? So I do a lot of mediation too, and nonviolent communication, things like that. So taking those skills, bringing them together. Did that answer your question? I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different parts to it, and that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm joining late. I'm Michelle Martin, so another double M over here. And I'm like catching up. I'm actually like on your LinkedIn profile, like actually looking at your resume right now. I'm like diving into all this stuff. I think like the thing that's like really coming up for me, which is, so like, it's like Vegas. Like, you guys might have talked about this. I'm sorry I had to join late, but it's like what Vegas represents, like from like a societal lens, is like, excess. Like it's like too much, or like, it's like the sacred and profane. It's like, if you want profane, go to Vegas. So I don't know. I'm just like, it's cool how like Vegas is like so prominent in like who you are and what you do, and like I guess my question, I don't even know if you were born there or from there, what the whole story is, but like, it's almost just like, where's Vegas been like, what role has it had in your like creative catalyzing as a human? Like, where's that played out?
Oh,
Yeah.
So yeah, no, absolutely. And here's one of the things. So I call Vegas the city of the magician, the fool, and the hanged man. Those are the three archetypes that like dominate the strip, right?
Cool.
However, it's also the city of Joseph, right? Like, and by that I'll go the non-biblical route and the musical theater route of and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? It is the city where people have been down and out in Vegas, like completely out, and it doesn't matter. Like, Adelson didn't have, I think he had a negative bank account before he built the Venetian, right? He had no money in his account, and he built the Venetian, right? So it is a city where because there are no sacred cows, because it's not like New York with its prominent institutions, you have this opportunity to like throw down in Vegas that you wouldn't have in another city. I lived in San Francisco before, and it was really hard to break the San Francisco, even though it's like open and in San Francisco, there's definitely a Stanford Berkeley cult in the world of engineering. And it was like even hard for my husband, who went to Harvard, to get into a place because he didn't go to Stanford, right? And that was kind of difficult. So Vegas does have that kind of energy also. And then people have been coming to Vegas for years, but then they're also going to Burning Man and Coachella. And so that transformational thing they want to have happen here. And people tend to go to Vegas multiple times, right? So like one of the cool things about living here is everyone wants to visit you and everyone will crash with you. So you don't have to go anywhere. Like everyone will come, right? And so Area 15 is the first big throwdown of providing a space that's kind of, here's where we can gather that's outside of gambling, right? And so I'm really excited to see what that does for community, because it's also very locus focused. So, and it's again, outside of gambling. So we're going away from kind of that hangman fool archetype and possibly into like more of a bit more magic and like more possibilities and opening those possibilities. So I'm excited for that version of Vegas. Also Vegas is a really small town. So like outside of it, so there's like 20,000 doers. It's super easy to figure out who they are. You're probably relatively connected and people are willing to do random stuff. So like I've thrown a TEDx youth day. I had a budget of $0, right? But I convinced a bunch of folks to like throw in with me. We did, we've done 2 maker fairs here. Like, so again, it's easier to get some stuff done because people are like, okay, cool. Why don't we try it? Right. And so that's been really fun for me. And I feel like my community really nurtures me in giving me these opportunities to play that way.
You know, I've heard this before and I forgot it. Now that you're telling me, I'm like, yeah, that's like a super truth. Yeah. And burner. So, you know,
right.
Yeah.
I like, all of my friends from San Francisco flew in for Rosh Hashanah, mostly because they were so stuck of being trapped in the Bay.
Yeah.
What do you mean? We can go to a restaurant in Las Vegas right now? And I was like, yes, but it's gonna, so like, there's a rapid COVID testing place. So we, and you can have results in 20 minutes. So you get like, it's been interesting to see like my Bay Area friends going, wow, San Francisco is really expensive. I can now work from anywhere. We is starting to seem really cool and it's way cheaper, right? So, and it has an international airport and has access. The other cool thing is we sit near Valley of Fire and we sit near Utah and Zion and all of this
Flagstaff.
natural, yeah, well,
No.
What's it called? Why can't I think of the name of it in Arizona, which is Grand Canyon, is not
Yes, Grand Canyon.
right?
Yes.
So yeah, it's really, really neat. And yes, absolutely, you can visit me, Diana. I like literally had a friend stay who I've only met online, and then again, it turned out she was the person who helped with Social Dilemma, right? So like I allow that kind of chaos to come into my world. So,
yeah, I had a question as well, like in kind of relation to the COVID thing, like you were mentioning, how that affected your work and your projects, but also say like, have you also looked at like, especially maybe during the height of pandemic, of like how, if you ever considered working closer with like frontline workers and like how your experiences could assist people like that, or people with mental health struggling during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the cool things about being on the social impact team with Meow Wolf was one of the first things we did when COVID hit was we put together a COVID resource guide. We beat the city on putting together a COVID resource guide. So our guide came out like 3 days before the city of Las Vegas's, and our mayor was totally on Anderson Cooper being completely ridiculous. 100% we kind of jumped into action. I personally ended up helping friends import K95s into Las Vegas and distributing those out. We distributed them out to the Paiute Nation as well. A bunch of my friends went into mask making immediately, right? Because they were costume folks from Cirque du Soleil and costume folks from all of the absinthe and stuff. Mask making just kind of immediately started happening in the arts community. So because we're in this position of knowing a lot of folks, we were able to move that. Also, one of the things, construction never stopped, right? And one of the reasons construction never stopped was because we were getting materials from China already in order to do some of our big builds. There's like 2 major builds that were happening in Vegas, and we could bypass trying to import PPEs directly by just putting them on the construction stuff already. So Vegas had this like really interesting pipeline because of where we're at from a construction point of view. So, and yeah, we have like a really older population too. So COVID was, I know it was something we took really seriously, and then of course our mayor didn't, and I know we opened up first. So yeah, it's been a kind of a mixed bag, but because of our small town nature, we were able to kind of spring into action, and we didn't ask for the same kind of government assistance that other states had to ask for, right? So, which is kind of cool because we have like these big infrastructure things that make us seem like city. We also had this like really weird thing that happened, which is strange, which kind of made me feel like I was in Melancholia, where like we had $4 million worth of French cheeses that would normally get eaten in the life cycle of a Las Vegas, couple of weeks. But we also saw like all of these businesses who were holding perishable inventory like caviar and cheeses and Kobe and all of these things that just opened their doors to the public and donated a bunch of stuff to the food banks. We killed buffet businesses, so which like holds a lot of like food waste, but food in general, and that got donated out to schools. And so you saw a lot of really interesting donations that I don't think existed in other cities. I mean, maybe New York's restaurant industry did the same thing, but it was really strange. Like, look, kids, your foie gras came, right? Like, so that was kind of a funny COVID part of Vegas.
I think it's interesting and a neat part to highlight, especially in there's a lot of discussion in different places around like, the arts, why are we funding the arts? People can get real jobs. And it's interesting seeing the ways in which the kind of community and the kind of mindset and the kind of networks that are there are like right first on the ground when there's a crisis like that, because people know how to operate in that kind of a situation and feel like, okay, this is a challenge. Let's dive into that challenge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. One of the cool things too, there's a woman named Kim Foster, and her husband is the person who's behind Spiegel World, which does absinthe. They put out a refrigerator in their front yard and just started a food kitchen. We saw a bunch of Wastelanders, like Wasteland Weekend is this post-apocalyptic festival. A lot of the Wastelanders here did the same thing. They built these boxes with food and made front yard food pantries. So people kind of went into collective action. We saw that in the Bay. Like a good chunk of my friends lived in the Bay as well, and there was a lot of like neighborhood food trading groups. And so I saw like hope in that. Like, oh my gosh, neighbors are finally talking to each other for the first time ever, because they might have to, because they need yeast, because all of a sudden there's no yeast or no toilet paper. And so I saw a level of collaboration I've never seen before, which I was really, really excited about. So I mean, I know pandemics are awful, but there are some silver linings. And I think that thirst for community, hopefully that stays. Also, the coolest thing that was happening was, because the strip was closed, like it got taken over by bikers. And so like people were biking the strip because it was so empty and there was like nothing there. Artists were making videos on the strip because it's like the first time normally if you pulled a strip permit, it's like impossible and it's really expensive, but you could like film Las Vegas and film little skits and bits and stuff with no permitting because it was all closed, right? And it was really interesting. So that also was cool.
Nice. I see we're at 12. One thing I want to make sure to ask, you mentioned you're going to be looking at kind of putting out some of the modules for your sort of parents' magical guide to kind of play with kids. Where would people look as those begin to come out?
Oh, well, so I probably should have never named it this, because I do have a site, which I'll put in, it's demiurgic.space, which is a complicated word to spell. As a marketing person, I would never recommend using a word like demiurgic. But, and so as I do stuff, I randomly throw things on there. But yeah, I hope to see that get published. I want to work with some of our graphic design folks and see if we can publish that into a book. But yeah, so demiurgic.space is where I throw up portfolio stuff, and then also just random thoughts on things, mostly because I just like never remember to keep my portfolio up to date. So I try, but I don't think I do a good job. But so Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Monera. This has been a really, really inspiring conversation, and I can't wait to dive into other topics and have a chance to talk more.